Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bookercast, the podcast where books come to life.
And I'm so excited to dive into another amazing story with all of you.
Whether you're a bookworm or just love a good story, this is the place for you.
Every episode, we explore incredible books, talk about their stories and characters, and share insights that'll make you fall in love with reading all over again.
All right, let's not keep you waiting any longer. Get comfortable, and let's jump right into it.
Sounds good.
Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive we're going to be taking into Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power. I mean, it's a book that's been everywhere, right? From boardrooms to, I feel like every aspiring entrepreneur has it on their bookshelf.
It really has, and for good reason. I think it's a book that speaks to something very fundamental about human nature. This idea that there are these sort of unspoken rules of power that have been in play for centuries.
Yeah, it's like he's giving us a glimpse behind the curtain, right? Showing us the mechanics of how power operates in different contexts and across history.
Exactly. And he does it by drawing on all sorts of examples from history, philosophy, even psychology. It's almost like a crash course in the strategies employed by some of history's most influential figures.
And it's not just about ancient history or, political maneuvering, right? This book has found a place in the modern self-help world, even though some people might think it's a little bit Machiavellian.
Right. It definitely pushes some buttons. I mean, it's not your typical self-help book about positive affirmations, but it does offer this really unique perspective on human behavior strategy and influence, like how to understand and navigate the dynamics of power, whether you're in a boardroom or just trying to navigate, everyday social situations.
Yeah, because at its core, it's about understanding how people work, right? Their motivations and how those motivations can be leveraged in different situations.
And Greene is very upfront about the fact that deception and manipulation are a part of that equation. He doesn't necessarily condone those tactics, but he presents them as these kind of timeless principles that we see throughout history.
Okay, so let's dive into some specifics here. Can you give us an example of one of these laws and how it plays out in a real-world situation?
Sure. The idea here is that you appear less intelligent than your target in order to disarm them. Make them feel superior, make them underestimate you.
Okay, that sounds sneaky.
Yeah.
Do you have a good example of that?
Oh, yeah. The story of Victor Lustig and Al Capone comes to mind. Lustig was this infamous con man, and he actually managed to con Al Capone, the notorious gangster, by playing the role of this kind of bumbling, naive businessman.
I'm already intrigued. So Capone, a man known for his ruthlessness, fell for this act.
He did. He completely bought it. Lustig basically used Capone's ego against him, made him feel like he was the smarter one in the room, and that made him let his guard down.
Wow. It's amazing how easily our perception of intelligence can be manipulated.
It is, and it makes you think about how that plays out in all sorts of power dynamics, right? Not just in con games, but in business negotiations, personal relationships even.
Absolutely. But hold on a second. Doesn't Greene also talk about the importance of building a strong reputation? How does that fit in with this idea of deception?
He does. He dedicates an entire law to it. Law 5, so much depends on reputation guard. With your life. He argues that your reputation is a crucial form of power, something you need to cultivate and protect carefully, but also something that can be used strategically, both to build yourself up and to undermine your rivals.
And he uses P.T. Barnum as an example of that, right? The master showman.
Oh, yeah. Barnum was brilliant at shaping public perception.
Yeah.
When he wanted to acquire the American Museum from the Peel family, he knew that their reputation was their biggest asset.
So how did he get around that?
He launched a smear campaign, planted all these negative stories about the museum and the Peel family, damaged their reputation to the point where they were willing to sell it to him at a bargain price.
It's a reminder that perception, even if it's based on falsehoods, can be incredibly powerful.
It absolutely is. And it speaks to the kind of cutthroat nature of power dynamics that Greene is exploring in this book.
So it's like a game of chess, in a way. You're not just thinking about your own moves, but you're trying to anticipate your opponent's reactions and manipulate the board to your advantage.
Yeah.
But that sounds a little ruthless, don't you think?
That's where the ethical considerations come in, right? Greene doesn't shy away from the darker side of power. He presents these laws as amoral. He's not telling you whether they're good or bad. He's simply laying out how they work.
So it's kind of like he's giving us a toolkit, but it's up to us to decide how to use those tools ethically.
Exactly. He's giving you the knowledge and the awareness, but the responsibility for how you use it ultimately falls on you, which I think is what makes the book so thought-provoking.
It's definitely a lot to unpack, and we've only just scratched the surface here. Let's dive into some more of these laws and see how they might be relevant in our own lives.
I'm game. Where should we go next?
Well, Greene spends a lot of time talking about the importance of not outshining those in positions of power.
Hmm.
What's that all about?
Right. He calls that Law 1, never outshine the master. The basic idea is that making your superiors feel threatened can backfire big time, even if you have the best intentions.
So it's not just about being competent, but about being aware of the power dynamics at play.
Exactly. And he uses Galileo as an example of this. Galileo made these groundbreaking astronomical discoveries, right? But he was also very smart about how he presented those discoveries to his patrons, the Medici family.
So he wasn't just like, hey, look at me, I'm brilliant.
No, he was much more strategic about it. He framed his discoveries in a way that made the Medici family look good, like they were the ones who had fostered this genius.
So it's about understanding the ego of those in power and navigating that carefully.
Exactly. And that can be a really valuable skill in all sorts of situations, right? Whether you're dealing with a boss, a client, or even a friend.
So it's not enough to be talented or even ear, right? You have to understand the power dynamics at play and how to navigate them effectively.
And sometimes that means holding back a little bit, not showing all your cards at once, which can be a tough lesson to learn.
It is, but I think it's a really important one.
Absolutely. Because sometimes the most powerful move is the one that's not made.
Okay, so we've talked about deception, reputation, and navigating power dynamics. What else does Greene have in store for us?
Well, there's a lot more ground to cover. He talks about the power of actions over words, cultivating an air of mystery, and even the dangers of committing too strongly to any one person or cause.
It sounds like the 48 Laws of Power is less about telling us what to do and more about providing a framework for understanding the often hidden forces that shape our interactions.
Exactly. It's like he's giving us this secret decoder ring for human behavior, allowing us to see the world through a different lens.
And I think that's what makes it so fascinating and potentially so valuable. It's not just about manipulating others, but about understanding the dynamics of power so that we can navigate them more effectively in our own lives.
Exactly. And as we delve deeper into this deep dive, we'll explore more of these laws, uncover their historical context, and see how they might be relevant in our modern world.
It's interesting how Greene talks about the importance of building a strong reputation, but then he also talks about being unpredictable.
Yeah.
It seems like those two things are kind of at odds with each other.
Yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act, right? On one hand, you want people to trust you and see you as reliable, but on the other hand, you don't want to be so predictable that they can take advantage of you.
So is that what Law 17 is all about? Keep others in suspended terror? Cultivate an air of unpredictability? That sounds intense.
It does, right? Like something out of a movie. But I think the point he's trying to make is that unpredictability can be a source of power. When people can't figure you out, it keeps them off balance, and that gives you a certain advantage.
Makes sense. I mean, if you know exactly what someone's going to do, you can easily manipulate them, right?
Exactly. But if they're a little bit unpredictable, it makes you hesitate. It makes you think twice before you try to cross them.
So who does he use as an example of this? Anyone we might know.
Well, he talks about Genghis Khan, the Mongol warlord who conquered vast swaths of Asia. His military tactics were notoriously unpredictable. He would feign attacks in one direction and then suddenly strike from another. His enemies could never quite figure out what he was going to do next, which made him very difficult to defeat.
So it's like he was always keeping them guessing, like a chess player who was always a few moves ahead.
Exactly. And I think there's a lesson there for us, even if we're not trying to conquer empires. I mean, in our own lives, being a little bit unpredictable can be a good thing. It keeps people on their toes and prevents them from taking you for granted.
Okay, so we've got reputation, unpredictability. What else?
Well, he also talks about the importance of not committing too strongly to any one person or cause. He calls it Law 20. Do not commit to anyone.
But isn't that kind of the opposite of what we're taught? I mean, we're always told to be loyal to our friends, our family, our beliefs.
Right. But Greene's argument is that true power comes from maintaining your independence. If you're too closely aligned with one side, you lose your ability to maneuver. You become a pawn in someone else's game.
Interesting. So who does he use as an example of this?
Well, he talks about Otto von Bismarck, the Prussian statesman who unified Germany. Bismarck was a master of playing different sides against each other. He would form alliances and then break them as it suited his needs. He was always looking out for his own interests, and in the end, he achieved his goal of creating a unified German state, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, you have to admire his strategic thinking, even if his methods were maybe a little bit questionable.
Right, and that's the thing with Greene's laws. They're not always morally black and white. They're more like tools. They can
Yeah.
be used for good or for evil. It all depends on the person wielding them.
So it's up to us to decide how to use this knowledge responsibly.
Exactly. And to be aware of the potential pitfalls. Because power can be a seductive thing. It can easily corrupt if you're not careful,
Yeah.
which is something else that Greene talks about.
Oh, yeah. He has a whole law about avoiding the unhappy and unlucky. What's that all about?
Yeah, Law 10, infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. It's a bit of a dark one. But basically, he's saying that negativity is contagious, and that if you surround yourself with people who are unhappy or unlucky, it will rub off on you.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start to believe that you're doomed to fail because everyone around you is failing.
Right, and I think there's some truth to that. We're all influenced by the people we spend time with, so it's important to be mindful of the company you keep.
And to seek out people who are positive and supportive.
Exactly, people who lift you up rather than drag you down.
Okay, so we've got reputation, unpredictability, independence, and positivity. What else is in this book?
Oh, there's so much more. He talks about the importance of mastering your emotions, of creating a compelling persona, of understanding the desires and fears of others. It's really a deep dive into human psychology.
It sounds fascinating and a little bit scary. I mean, if you take all these laws to heart, you could become a master manipulator.
That's the danger, right? But I think the real value in this book is not in learning how to manipulate others, but in understanding how manipulation works.
So that you can protect yourself from it.
Exactly, because once you understand the game, you're less likely to be played.
It's crazy to think that a book written like, what, back in the 90s is still so relevant today.
Yeah, it really speaks to the timelessness of these ideas, right? I mean, human nature hasn't really changed that much. We're still driven by the same desires and fears, and those desires and fears can be exploited.
One of the things that really stuck with me is this idea of creating a compelling persona. Greene talks about how it's not just about what you do, but how you present yourself to the world.
It's Law 27, create a cult-like following. He looks at all sorts of figures throughout history, religious leaders, politicians, even artists who've been able to create this aura around themselves that draws people in.
It's like they're building a brand, but the brand is them.
Exactly. And it's not about being fake or inauthentic. It's about understanding how perception works and using that to your advantage.
Like Steve Jobs, right?
Yeah.
He was a master at creating this image of himself as a visionary.
Exactly. He understood that people buy into the story as much as they buy into the product. And he was brilliant at crafting a narrative that resonated with people.
But again, it makes you think about the ethical implications, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you draw the line between authenticity and manipulation?
Right, and I think that's a question that each individual has to answer for themselves. Greene doesn't give you any easy answers. He's just presenting you with the tools, and it's up to you to decide how to use them.
And he's pretty clear that power itself is a neutral force. It can be used for good or for evil.
Exactly. It all comes down to intention. Are you using your power to help others or to exploit them? Are you building something up or tearing something down?
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Knowing these laws doesn't make you a bad person. It's what you do with that knowledge that matters.
And I think that's one of the things that makes this book so valuable. It forces you to confront these questions about power and responsibility. It's not just a how-to manual for manipulating people. It's a deep dive into human psychology and the often hidden forces that shape our interactions.
So what's the biggest takeaway you hope our listeners get from this deep dive?
I think the most important thing is to be aware of the power dynamics that are at play in your own life, to understand the games that people are playing, and to make conscious choices about how you want to participate.
Because knowledge is power, right?
It is. But it's also responsibility. The more you know, the more responsible you become for your actions.
So it's not just about winning the game, it's about playing it in a way that aligns with your values.
Exactly. And hopefully in a way that makes the world a little bit better, even if it's just in your own small corner of it.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap things up. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the 48 Laws of Power.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep your wits about you and remember, knowledge is power.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of BookerCast. We hope you enjoyed diving into it as much as we did. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts on this episode.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this episode with your fellow book lovers. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. See you in the next deep dive. Bye for now, and happy reading.